Gather round, ye pollywogs, and mark down what I say while you still have hands to mark with. Today, in honor of the multiversally observed tradition of Talk Like a Pirate Day, let us speak of the Lord of the Waves, the breaker of ships, the grandfather of the sea itself, the Kraken. Now, I know most of you have heard whispers in a dockside tavern and tales told over sour grog of ships dragged below by tentacles as thick as masts. But believe you me, the Kraken is no mere fishtail. He's as real as the salt on your skin. Big as houses he is. And a monolith of flesh and tentacles. His arms a coat of hooks like gaffs to seize a ship. His eyes like portholes out onto a dark night upon a raging typhoon. He hunts not for treasure nor for glory, but for the sheer unholy joy of unmaking what the hands of man have wrought. The sea in all its fury made manifest, ready to lay low the pride of fleets with nary a thought. Where he dwells, no light reaches. The sheer weight of the sea in those lightless depths would crush you like the hand of an angry god. And yet here he thrives, in blasphemous defiance, stirring only when it can hold back the tide of its hatred no more, and rises once again to the waters that we tread. Trade routes chart course around his haunts. Ports fall silent in his season, and many a shanty is sung in his shadow. And yet there is always the itch, the aching curiosity deep in the back of a sailor's mind. Perhaps a product of the same wanderlust that drives a young man to board his first ship and strike for a life at sea. You see, for every Kraken brought low is not only a victory over terror, but the promise of meat, oil, ink, and glory enough to fill to bursting the ship's hold, and with it the crew's bellies, their coin purses, and most importantly, the songs of bards for years to come. So, mark this well, shipmates. To speak of Kraken is to speak not only of peril, but of possibility. And that is why every sailor worth his salt learns how to not only fear the beast, but also how to cook him. Now then, you've heard the songs of how to slay the Kraken, ballads of ballistas, sorcerers with lightning in their veins, or some unlucky crew who prayed hard enough to a fickle god for it to make a difference. But what those songs don't tell you is this: the real work begins after the monster is dead. You see, no sailor, no chef, no king's champion could ever butcher a Kraken all on their own. It is a task too great for a single set of hands. The Kraken is a mountain of flesh, a floating fortress of sinew and hide, and taking her apart is truly a civic undertaking. In most ports, the first task is dragging the beast ashore. That is a battle all on its own. Ropes as thick as a man's torso, pulleys that creak under the titanic weight, and whole crews straining while wizards levitate chunks and priests beg the tide to rise in their favor. To complete this undertaking, a town must transform its wharf into a gigantic butcher's shop. Once the Kraken is secured, then the work begins in earnest. Tentacles first and always first. Each hacked free with axes, saws, or enchanted blades, and hauled aside, often still twitching like beheaded serpents. Butchers then carve off the thick hide to reach the tender, prized flesh within. It's never a quiet business. The entire port becomes a living orchestra, with butchers calling for leverage, children darting around with baskets, cooks already firing up spits, and elders muttering charms so the sea won't curse the harvest. The smell of brine and blood thickens until the city itself feels more Kraken than stone. But the mood is jubilant, for yesterday the monster was terror and today it's supper. Together they carve their nightmare into sustenance, with each hand proving that survival is not a solitary act. But there are other tales, whispered from faraway seas, where no portside feast is possible. In certain island chains where the reefs are treacherous and no dock could bear such a monster, folk say they butcher the Kraken at sea. Picture it, a dozen ships fanning out across the waves, each crew taking a tentacle for their own. Harpoons and hooks bite deep as sails groan, and every deck becomes its own butcher's table just the same. Sailors hack and saw, severing massive lengths, then lash the dripping prize onto their hulls. By the end, the Kraken's body is left drifting like a broken mountain while her tentacles are parceled out among the fleet, each vessel dragging its share back to the shore for salting, smoking, and storing. Whether this is truth or sailor's myth, who can say? Some call it folly, claiming that cutting up a kraken at sea invites sharks, scavengers, or worse things from below. Others swear by the method, saying it's the only real way to keep the meat from rotting before landfall. I once drank with an islander who swore his people feast not in one city, but across many shores, each village receiving a tentacle being borne home by ship. The kraken feeds all, he told me, but only if we divide him among us. So, whether ashore or afloat, the lesson is the same. No one feasts on kraken alone. It's too vast, too dangerous, too monumental to be the size and the prize of a single hand. Now that we've hauled the beast in and carved it to pieces, let us speak of the matter that concerns your bellies most. What does kraken taste like? The answer, my friends, is that it tastes like the sea itself, but not the polite, sunlit sea where children paddle in the shallows. Kraken meat carries the taste of storms and salt spray, of pressure and darkness, of 1,000 leagues where no light has ever reached. But let's break it down section by section because a kraken has a lot to offer. Let's start with the tentacles, for they're the most abundant. These are the hardest work muscles in all the seas, always in motion, whether for swimming, grabbing, or thrashing. The result is meat as tough as ship's rope and twice as chewy. Cook it wrong and you'll spend your evening gnawing like a dog on driftwood. But if you skin it properly, remove the hide, and then treat it with patience, it transforms into a delicacy with a deep, savory chew. I recommend to pound the meat with a cleaver or warhammer, then marinate it, and braise it long and slow in wine and stock. The longer the better until it's just shy of falling apart. Now the body is another matter entirely. Beneath that thick hide lies meat of surprising tenderness, dense but yielding, with the texture of a well-marbled steak. When seared hot and fast, it takes on a char that crackles with the taste of fire and brine, a perfect counter to its natural richness. This is the cut for feasts, which is the exact thing you should be having if you're butchering a kraken in the first place. Slap it on a grill, then hand it to a sailor still dripping wet from the battle. What both the body and the tentacles share, though, is a flavor profile I can only describe as the true brine. Where fish and shellfish often act as a canvas for spices, kraken meat stands on its own. It's bold, storm-strong, and briny to the core in a way that you have never experienced with other seafood. It has a savoriness that can drown out lighter seasonings. Many a young cook has ruined a kraken roast by fussing around with way too many herbs or spices. My advice? Keep it simple. A dash of salt and pepper, maybe a squeeze of citrus, then let the kraken meat speak for itself. But heed this above all else. Kraken meat spoils faster than a sailor's vow of sobriety. The sea has a way of reclaiming her gifts quickly. If that meat is not cooked within a day, it turns from feast to foulness. That's why any kraken harvest becomes a festival. There's simply too much to eat alone, and no time to waste. So, what do you do when you've hauled your prize ashore, butchered it clean, and feasted until your belly's groaned? A kraken's no ordinary catch. It gives more meat than any city can eat in a night, and anything left over succumbs to rot and stench by the next day. If you don't act quickly, what was triumph today will be a reeking curse tomorrow. That's why the true art of kraken cookery is not just feasting, but preserving. The most common method, and the oldest, is smoking. Bonfires roar along the shoreline. Racks of tentacle strips and body cuts dangle above that smoke, soaking in both fire and salt air. The meat toughens, darkens, and takes on a flavor like charred brine, strong enough to last weeks at sea. Sailors will slice it thin and chew it on long voyages, calling it Kraken jerky. I've had it, and the quality can range from delightful to bottom of the barrel, depending on the skill with which it was made. Another way is to drown the beast in salt. Casks are filled with layer after layer of meat and salt until the brine forms naturally. Done right, it can keep the Kraken's body meat edible for months, if not longer, though the taste does lean a bit sharp, and it gets more metallic the longer it sits. For those with vinegar or strong fruit wines, pickling is a clever art. Tentacle slices are steeped in sour brine, spiced with herbs or peppers, then left to sit. Done properly, they can last through winter storms and be eaten cold straight from the jar. I once dined with a pirate captain who swore by Kraken pickles, claiming they made his crew fiercer in battle. Truth be told, I think it just made them smell of garlic. And in richer ports, some will submerge Kraken cuts in rendered whale fat or other heavy oils. This seals out the air completely, keeping the meat soft and savory for weeks. It's a luxurious method, but it is costly and rare. The flavor, though, it is leagues beyond salt or smoke. Imagine pulling a jar from the hold weeks into a voyage, opening it up, and finding Kraken as tender as the day it was cut. That can make morale go through the roof. At the end of the festival, what many learn is the greatest preservation is of the community itself. When a Kraken falls, it feeds not one table, but 100. The city roars to life, butchers slice, cooks roast, priests bless, brewers tap casks, and traders ready barrels. Families claim their portions to salt, smoke, or pickle. Ships in the harbor take on jerky for the voyage ahead. Nothing is wasted, not the meat, not the ink, not even the hide. And for a brief, shining moment, the terror of the sea becomes a festival of plenty. So, take this lesson, you who dream of sailing the waters. The Kraken is too large, too wild, and too fleeting for one crew to conquer alone. Its flesh spoils swift as the tide, but with the hands of many, his bounty can be stretched across seasons. The sea demands respect, and in return, she gives feasts to those wise enough to share them. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you to Sam Hain in my Discord for helping me with this script. His nautical knowledge helped immensely. And speaking of the Discord, feel free to jump in to discuss eating monsters with plenty of people way smarter and more creative than I am. And check out my Ko-fi page to download this write-up for your own table, along with some Kraken recipes for your players. All my content is available on my Ko-fi page completely free of charge. And tell me in the comments, how would you want to cook Kraken? Happy Pirate Day!